Hi guys, this is Stefan Persson, also known as Imphenzia, and I'm making a game called That's Racing, which is a low polygon racing game. And for that game I'm gonna need a lot of low poly trees, and I've started to make some in Blender here, and I wanted to go through the process of how I make them, and maybe I can share some tips and tricks on how you can make your own low polygon trees. And I'll also bring them into Unity and show you some of the shader effects that you can apply to get them to sway a little bit in the wind, and also add some weather effects to them. So as you can see here, I already got a bunch of trees, and I've enabled screencast keys here, so you should be able to see all the keystrokes that I do, and I'm going to be trying to say them all out loud as well. And I'm by no means a Blender expert, so bear with me when I hit the wrong keys all the time, but just going to have to live with it. Maybe I'll try to edit some of it out as well, but let's see how it goes. So as you can see, I've made a bunch of trees here, and I've also got a whole bunch of tree trunks here that I'm going to be adding foliage to later on. And but I will be making a tree from scratch, so I can show you the whole process here. And so I press Shift-C to get the cursor back into the center mode. And then I press the Del key to get the rotation the way I want it. And I'm also usually in orthographic mode, which is when I make these trees. Rather than perspective. So Shift-A to add a mesh, and I always start with a cube. And let's go into the front view in orthographic. And I also want to make sure that the tree is at the base, so when you place it in the train, it's going to be a lot easier. So I press Tab, and then I press S to scale it down a little bit to get a smaller stem. And then I also want to move the bottom mesh here. So I've got the face select here. And I want to move that face up to Z0 to make sure that it's at the very base of the object, the pivot point. And from there, I might as well actually do the UV mapping here as well. So I select all the faces and I go into the UV editing mode. And I've already loaded this very simple palette for a tree that I'm going to be using. And we click all meshes, unwrap just like this. And since I'm not texture mapping it, I just want the colors from this texture. So I just shrink all these meshes or faces down. And then I press G to grab it. And then I move it into the center of the brown, because the stem is going to be brown at all times. And then I have 3 different shades for the leaves later on. And then I go back into the default mode. And then we're going to model a basic stem here. So I make sure I'm in face mode here. Actually, I'll go into perspective mode now, I think, which is numpad 5 again. And then I just work by extruding. Let's see, I have to get this off. This is the proportional editing, which I don't want now. It moves faces which are in the neighborhood. So I disable that. And then basically I just extrude. And then I press the S key to scale the face. And then I can extrude again. And then shrink that down a little bit. And then basically I just work with the S key for scale and G for, if I press G to grab, I move it a little bit offset like that. And then you can also click on these gizmo arrows to move it on a specific axis here. So, and then press E again to extrude up, G to move it a little bit. And then let's say here I come to a point where I want to split this into multiple branches, and since I want the low poly look, I just do E for extrude again, and I just go up a little bit like this. Because now I can grab a face here, and then extrude this one with E. And then I might move it a little bit, and then maybe up a little bit by using the axis. And then S to scale. And then also, we can go on top here and extrude this one again, scale. And then I work like this. By just extruding the faces, pressing G to grab them. And move them basically. Extrude here, grab, scale, grab. Let's move this one up a lot. And let's say we want this one to move over a little bit more like this. Then also you can grab, I'll extrude this one again, and then I'll split this into multiple branches here. Like this. Scale, grab, up. And let's do one more here. Extrude with E. S for scale. And move this one up. And here as well, now you can grab a whole bunch of faces. So I like to work with the control key. I go into vertex select instead, and then I hold the control key, and then I can draw all the vertices that I want to select, and I press R to rotate. And as you can see now, it didn't pick the back ones, so I press escape to go out of that, and I enable this one. So now it also shows me the vertices that are behind, and I redo this. I press A to select everything, and A to deselect everything again as well. So the control key, click, drag around all the vertices I want, and then R to rotate. G to grab and move it a little bit again. And then I basically just work like this in different view modes to get an interesting tree look. And then I can also do the same thing with the scale here. And you can also set if you want it to scale in a, let's see. If I press, you see when I scale now, it scales from the center of the object, which I wouldn't want to do that if I scale a whole tree up. So if I press the period key on the keyboard, it changes the scale center to the pivot point, or to the, the pivot point of the object. So if I scale now, as you can see, it grows the whole tree. And it's also important to be in face mode here. So with a tab, so you can see the faces. So you scale all the time within the this one. Because if I go out of edit mode, it's important that this scale is always 1. So it makes it easier later on in the, you can fix it later on as well, but try to stick to keep it at 1 there. So when you have a tree like this, maybe that's all we want for this one. And then we want to add this foliage look to it, the leaves. And there are a number of ways I do that, but I'll take you through one of them for this particular tree. And so I press tab to get out of the object mode, and then I press A to deselect everything. And then let's say I want to add, I click on this face here, and then it'll put the cursor right there. And then I press Shift A to add, in this case, I'll add a cube. And then I want to apply a modifier here, which is the subdivision surface. And let's bring that up to 2. And that basically just creates a sphere, a cube mapped sphere. And I like to work with different shapes. You could have used this one called the icosphere, for example, which I use sometimes as well. But for this case, I'll just use the cube and subdivide it. And then I click apply to get this mesh the way I want. And then I press tab to go into edit mode. Face select. A to select all the faces. And then I go into the UV editing, sorry. And then I press unwrap. And again, it doesn't matter that all the faces are showing like this, because we're not going to texture map it in the traditional way of doing UV islands. So I'll press S to scale this down. Let's do that again. G to grab them, and then I'll move them up just to get this solid green color there. And then what I want to do is I want to go back into the default view here. And then I can switch off the transparency there. And then I press A twice, first to deselect everything, and then again to select. And then I press Shift D to duplicate this. And then I put this G to grab. I want to place it just at the tip of that branch, like this. Shift D again to duplicate. And I'm in the same object now. This is still the same object. I'm just duplicating all the mesh, the vertices and the faces here. I use G to grab it and move it into the place. And then I press Shift D again. Let's add that one up there. G to grab it and move it a little bit. And if I want to change now, as you can see, this gizmo is controlling, and that's because I used the pivot point of the object when I wanted to resize the tree. But if I press the key, the comma key now, then it'll change it to the center of the vertices that I've added, or these faces here. And I press Shift D again. And now I can actually use these arrows as well, since I pressed the comma key to get the center point of the mesh. So now I've added some, and that looks crap, to be honest, but we're not done yet. So let's fix this. We don't want this like perfect symmetrical or spherical shape. So basically what you can do now is if you press tab mode, you can actually select, if I press L now, it'll select all the linked faces or vertices for this particular group of vertices. And if I just go and click the L key now on all these, I aim with the mouse and I click L, then I can select all the faces here. I could have clicked A actually. So if I deselect everything and click A again, so in this case I could have used A, but sometimes it's really useful to use the L key to get the linked vertices. And first thing we can do, for example, is let's actually rescale this and make these a little bit bigger. And then I can't be in this with everything selected, because if I do that, as you can see, they'll all like just sent outwards. So this operation I actually need to do on these individually. So I click A again to deselect. I click L, or let's see, I need to select the face first. L to select this face, and then now if I scale, it scales it in place here. So let's just click these L to get the linked, and then just make these a little bit bigger. L for the linked ones. I select with the right mouse button, L, scale up a little bit. And this one again, L, scale. So, and now we want to get some irregularity to this. These look way too round. So what you can do then, for example, is if I click A to select everything, or actually I don't need to do that because this operates on the whole mesh mod or on the whole object level. So, and I go to modifier and I want to add a displace modifier. And here I want to click on new and change this into, I'll click on this one here. And I change this into a cloud texture. Zoom this in a little bit. And then I go back to the modifier. And if I change the strength here now, I need to go out of edit mode actually. So I click tab here. Now you can see that it warps this the meshes a little bit and gets out of that irregular. So when I do that, you get starting to get a little bit of a different view to it. I'll do it. Let's see, you can also change this one, the level. So let's say we wanted it like that. Maybe that's, and then I click apply here now. So this could be one tree if you wanted it like this. I still think it needs a little bit of work to it. So usually I just play around in this edit mode here. So maybe, for example, I want to do, if I add another modifier here saying, let's subdivide this one into, let's see, that didn't work. No, that's going to be way too many meshes. So let's not subdivide it. Let's instead do this decimate modifier. And then we scale it down. Then I start reducing actually vertices here to get even more of a low poly look like that. And when I go into edit mode, you see that effect disappears, and it's because it's showing me the mesh instead. This modifier operates not on the mesh edit mode, but on the object mode. So I need to be out of the mesh edit mode with tab here. Let's apply this one. And I still think that these groups of these chunks should be a bit bigger. So let's make them a little bit bigger again. Tab into edit mode. I'll click on one face. L to select all the link. S to scale it. And let's scale all of these up. L, scale. Select L, scale. Select that face. L, scale. And then L to select the linked. And then scale. Here we go. So now we're starting to get a tree that I like the look of. Then I like to name them properly. I'll press Shift C to get back into the cursor mode here. If it pivots, when you rotate the view and it doesn't pivot around this, you can press the delete key, I think. Now it should hopefully rotate around this one, I think. Nope. There we go. I need it to be in object mode. So I don't want to go into orthographic mode again here now, and then number 1 to get the front view. So let's say I was happy with this tree now. Then I want to rename my objects. I'm up to tree 12 here, so I'm going to make tree 13. So this cube, I'll double click on that one and rename it tree 013 bear, because this one, as you can see, doesn't have the leaves. Let's move that one out. because we want to keep that one for a bare tree. But then press Shift D to duplicate the whole object, escape, and then we can move it back to 0 here. And now what I want to do is I want to parent, or I want to join. So I select this object with all the leaves, and then I shift and I shift and right click on the tree, and I press Ctrl J to join these together. So now it's a single mesh, and let's call this one regular. So this is the normal look of this tree. And this tree model is actually finished. I think I'm allergic to Blender maybe. So let's go. This tree is finished now, but let's say I want to make a different variations. As you can see here, I've got a bunch of 4 variations of each tree, and I want to make another one. So I've moved that onto the side. I press Shift D to duplicate it, escape to snap it back, and then I'll move it to here. And now I want to operate just on these leaves. I want to keep the stem the same way. So if I go into edit mode, now I want to break this into a separate mesh again, so I can operate on just the leaves and not this. The easiest way to do that one is to select something on the tree here and press L for linked. That will pick all the vertices and faces for the tree trunk. And then I press Ctrl I to invert that selection. And then I press P to separate, and I separate by selection here. And now this is snapped back into a separate object, as you can see here. So if I select this one, as you can see, this is a separate object now again. That's how I want to work on this. And now let's make a little variation. So I go into edit mode and I select all the vertices, and then maybe I want to scale them up a little bit. And here I like to start playing as well with this proportional editing. So I enabled this proportional editing, and then maybe I want to select some random vertices at the top here of the mesh. Press 1 to get into the front view again. Let's select Shift, select this vertex as well. And then if I move this up now, you can see not only does it move the vertices that are selected, but it moves the ones that are in the vicinity as well. Vicinity, is that how you say it? In the neighborhood. And if I press Ctrl Z and I do that again, I can also press G to grab this, and then I press Z or Z to force it to move on the Z axis up and down. And then if I use the scroll wheel now, I can change how much this proportional editing should be affecting this. So I can pull this up. So if I change this one, maybe I want to create a tree that looks a bit like this. And I can also use scaling, and that's also proportional. So now we suddenly got a tree with a different look to it. Similar, but still enough different to maybe save that one. And to keep this tree, I want to have it as one mesh, or one object at least. So I click on this one, and I shift and right click on the tree trunk. I press Ctrl J to join it. Then I rename this one to Lush maybe, because it's nice and lush. It's got some more foliage to it. And let's make one last variation of this tree as well, just to cement this whole thing in. I select this one, press Shift D to duplicate it, escape to snap it back. I move it into view here where I would like to work on it. It's not a must that you do it at origin here, but I like to do it that way. And let's go into tab mode again to edit this object. And remember here, we want to select something on the tree trunk, press L to get all the linked vertices, Control I to invert the selection, and then press P to detach selection, separate it. Now I can work on this object alone. And here maybe we want to, I like to twist these around as well. So if I select the top vertices here again, like I did last time, and one nice effect for these low poly trees I found was if you select this one, you keep this proportional editing enabled, and you press R to rotate, and then Z to make sure that it rotates around the center Z axis. And then let's scale this one up a bit. So if you just add a little slight twist to it, that can make the trees look a bit interesting as well. Like that, for example. has got quite a nice aesthetics to it, I think. And then let's add a little bit more. Let's try a little bit more on this particular mesh. Let's see how this goes. So I go tab out of into object mode. Let's add this modifier now and do a subdivision. 2 levels. And let's apply this modifier. And this is going to be too many polygons now for this low poly look. This is starting to get too detailed. But before we decimate this one, let's still add a modifier and displace this one a little bit. And let's pick that texture that we did before, which was the cloud texture. And then let's play around with the strength here a little bit. Maybe like that. Apply this modifier. And then finally, let's do a big decimate here as well. There's way too many faces on this one. So let's do a decimate. Can bring it down to that level maybe. And then apply this one. And as you can see now, it's a lot further, or it's a lot fewer here as well. Another trick to get a little bit different. As you can, if you remember, I had a palette here in the UV mapping with some different colors. So if I do 7 to get the top view here, and then make sure I don't have this transparency thing selected, so that's disabled. I press the B key for box select. And now it's selected all the faces that have that can be viewed from on top. And I want to reduce this selection a little bit by shrinking it. So I'll press Control- on the numpad, and that shrinks down my selection a little bit. And then I press G here when I'm over the UV map, and I'll move this to there. And now I've got some polygons that are brighter up here, the different shade. And also if I press Control-7, in the same way, I'll get the base of the tree. So B for box select. And then Control- to shrink it down a little bit. Actually, let's go into face. Then maybe I'll keep the Shift key and I'll press a few of these as well. I'll just select some random meshes down here. Or faces, sorry. Maybe these ones as well. Like that. And then I go over here on the left side, press G, and then I move this down to the darker shade. So now we've got a little bit of color variation in this tree as well. So there we go. Finally is to join this one. So I'll go back into the default view here. Press 1 to get the front view. Select this one. Shift select the tree trunk. Control J. And then let's call this one Twisty. Here we go. So that's the low poly editing of this tree. Maybe that gave you some hints and tips and tricks on how to do low poly modeling in Blender. And in the next video, I'll import this tree into Unity, and I'll show you an amplify shader that I made using the amplify asset. And it'll add some character to the tree by making it sway a little bit in the wind using the vertex shader, and it'll also I'll make a little weather effect to them as well that you can have a look at. So have a look at that video. You can view it. I'll put a link here somewhere. Just click on that and enjoy. Hope you have fun modeling in Blender. Take care. See ya.